Good morning. Committee will come to order. We appreciate the panel being here, and I'll be brief in my opening remarks so we can get to the testimony. Last month, the national unemployment rate was down to 4.4%, and the stock market continues to rise, setting new highs almost daily. But amid these encouraging statistics, the American economy continues to grow at only half its historic average. A slower economy means lower growth in wages for American workers, a higher national debt, and makes it harder for Americans to achieve the American dream. Just last week, the administration acknowledged the need for faster economic growth through their Maganomics plan, a term I'm told was coined by our former colleague and new OMB director, Mick Mulvaney. I look forward to continue working with the administration on their priorities of regulation and tax reform to grow the economy. One group that should benefit from these reforms are new and small businesses, as they are the main engines of economic growth. They create the majority of our nation's jobs and spur innovation. However, since the Great Recession, there has been a significant decline in entrepreneurship, which may in part explain the slow economic growth experienced in America today. With last week marking Major League Baseball's All-Star Game, the committee has put together its own group of small business and entrepreneurship all-stars to testify this morning. By listening to solutions that can be made by the federal government, universities, and the private sector, we can all work together to ensure America remains the most innovative and entrepreneurial country in the world. We appreciate the testimony of the witnesses today. As some members may be aware, we originally I had Larry Kudlow also on the panel, and unfortunately he informed us yesterday he was unable to make it today, so he will not be here. But we have three great witnesses we'll turn to shortly, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this timely hearing. In this committee, we often say that small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and that is absolutely true. However, when we think about job creation, something I know all of our constituents want us to focus on, it is not just small firms, but specifically new firms that lead the way. Fledgling companies that scale up rapidly need to add employees to their payrolls, and that translates into new jobs. This type of entrepreneurship has long been a cornerstone of our economy, and it is necessary for the United States to see continued economic prosperity. While the last 2 years have seen a slight uptick in business formation, unfortunately, entrepreneurship and business creation has seen a decades-long decline since the 1970s. In 2014, our nation created slightly over 450,000 new firms. That represented the lowest numbers of firms created in any year in more than 4 decades. This troubling trend stems from a confluence of factors. Lack of capital remains an ongoing problem for all entrepreneurs. However, the problem is particularly pronounced for traditionally disadvantaged demographics like women and minorities. In fact, the Kaufman Foundation found that over 70% of Asian, Hispanic, and Black entrepreneurs relied on personal and family savings as their main source of startup capital. And women typically launch their ventures with 25% less capital than their male counterparts. These disparities come with significant costs to our economy. According to one analysis, if minorities started businesses at the same rate as non-minorities, the U.S. will have more than 1 million additional employer businesses and as much as an extra 9.5 million jobs. We must also look at ways to foster entrepreneurship among younger people. With over $1 trillion in national student loan debt and an average of $37,000 for recent graduates, too many young people are foregoing the opportunity to create a new business. I have authored legislation that will provide student loan relief to recent graduates who launch startups and to their employees. I will be interested in hearing the panel's view on that idea today. Finally, we must ensure that our nation remains the land of opportunity for foreign-born entrepreneurs. Immigration and entrepreneurship have long been twin drivers of our economic success. For generations, America has been the place to take a chance, build a business, and ultimately strengthen our economy and communities. In my city, New York, nearly half the small businesses are owned by immigrants. Nationally, more than half of startups valued at $1 billion or more were founded by immigrants. To reverse declines in entrepreneurship, we must build on this asset. I am concerned that the current administration policies and anti-immigrant rhetoric could severely stifle this important source of talent. We should be advancing strategies that draw on immigrants' innovation, hard work, and entrepreneurial spirit, not creating additional barriers. During today's hearing, we will hear a wide array of ideas to foster entrepreneurship. This is an important topic that directly affects the livelihoods of all our constituents, whether you are from Brooklyn, New York, Silicon Valley, Cincinnati, Ohio, or Lincolnshire in Illinois. I hope today's discussion provides a range of new ideas that members of the committee can coalesce around. In that regard, I want to thank all the witnesses for their participation and insights. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have an opening statement prepared, we'd ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd like now to take just a moment to explain our timing rules here. It's pretty simple. You get 5 minutes to testify, and we get 5 minutes. I know some of you have been through the drill before, and some many times. There's a lighting system to assist you. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on, let you know you got about a minute to wrap up, and then the red light will come on, and we ask you to stay within that time frame, if at all possible. And I'd now like to introduce our distinguished panel here this morning. Our first witness is Dr. Gregory Crawford, the current president of Miami University, the real one in Oxford, Ohio, not that one down in Florida. And I might note that our staff director, Kevin Fitzpatrick, is a graduate of Miami University, and my son, Randy, and my brother, Dave. And Dave is a Miami merger because his wife, Ellen, also went there, and they've got 4 kids and live in Florida. In any event, we welcome you here, Dr. Crawford. Under your leadership, the entrepreneurship program at Miami University's Farmer School of Business is ranked 6th among public institutions and 1st in social entrepreneurship. He's also an entrepreneur himself, co-founding Myomics, a drug discovery company, and Quorum Medical, which produces non-invasive optical devices. And we thank you for being here. And our second witness is Ms. Karen Kerrigan, President and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, not a stranger, of course, to this committee. Ms. Kerrigan has testified before numerous House and Senate committees, and we welcome her back. She's an advocate for protecting small businesses and promoting entrepreneurship here in Washington, D.C., not just here in D.C., but all over the country. She's served on numerous federal advisory boards, including the National Women's Business Council and the U.S. Treasury Taxpayer Advisory Panel. And we again welcome you here. And I'd now like to yield to the ranking member to introduce our third witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Joe Shocken, the president and founder of Broadmark Capital, headquartered in Seattle, Washington. He currently serves on the United States Commerce Department's National Advisory Committee on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He holds a degree from the University of Washington and an MBA from Harvard University. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Dr. Crawford, you're recognized for 5 minutes. If you could turn that mic on there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just thrilled to be here today to talk about entrepreneurship, so thank you so much for the invitation. I'd like to answer 3 questions today. How do universities cultivate entrepreneurial leaders? The second question, how does Miami University promote the entrepreneurial spirit? And thirdly, the new metric we're looking at is not just if our students get jobs, but how many jobs they actually create. So a little bit about my biases and my background. I'm a physicist and inventor, so a little bit geeky, I bet. Co-founder of 2 tech startup companies, industrial experience out in Silicon Valley at Xerox PARC, economic development in Indiana, and then leadership at 3 top universities. And so over my time in my career, sort of come to the definition of entrepreneurship as seeking potential, seizing opportunity, and synthesizing solutions for societal impact. And many folks think that at a university that entrepreneurship is fully embedded in the business school, and we have one of the best business schools in the country, the Farmer School. But nevertheless, entrepreneurship is all throughout our campus, and more than half of our students are actually outside the business school in all different majors across all the different colleges and so forth. One example is the company Oris, which just was featured in the Forbes magazine article, Why Ohio is the Best State in America to Launch Startups, that were 2 science students at Miami who actually leveraged the NASA technology aerogel with low thermal conductivity and made great new coats and apparel for that. So we're very excited about that. Entrepreneurship education, and how do we do it? We kind of think of it in 3 steps. Number 1, we think of the T-shaped individual, and that's the person that has both depth, so they're a good computer scientist, for example, but then we have this wonderful liberal arts core where they can study philosophy and ethics and anthropology and so forth. And then surrounded by that, we look at entrepreneurship as a co-major, so they tack that on, but what we bring to the table for our students is really to get them involved with entrepreneurship, exercises, experiences, and so forth, and those experiences. And so we look at it that way. We have a top-ranked Institute for Entrepreneurship, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, and also we have wonderful entrepreneurial faculty and students in our Armstrong Institute for Interactive Media Studies. Our ecosystem, a student can go along all different paths in the university. They can be involved with entrepreneurial clubs. They can live in a dorm that's an LLC, a living learning community where they're all entrepreneurial minded. They can go and start a social entrepreneurship company through a net impact club. We do all kinds of great things on events, and they can be part of a venture competition. We have a startup weekend where they're just involved with starting a company over a 3-day period. And we have internships all around the world, around the country. We think that, you know, Oxford, Ohio is fantastic, but we need to get in the heart of some of these entrepreneurial environments. And so I'd love to talk to you about a few of the examples there. Number 1, we just think there's no replacement for students getting involved with an entrepreneurial company. They're real projects with real stakes, real consequences. It's messy, complex, and risky, and we want to get them involved with that. And one of our affiliations is in Centrifuge in Cincinnati, and it's just a wonderful place, which is a catalyst for high-tech startups and small startups and so forth. And so our students are engaged with companies such as Road Tripper, Framery, 8451, and the Brandery, and they really get mixed up in those type of experiences. The second one is putting our students in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so we were one of the first external satellite campuses out there in Silicon Valley in the San Francisco area. And it's a study abroad experience in a sense, but in our country. And the students are embedded in startup companies for 4 days of the week. And then on the 5th day, they get to meet with executives and thought leaders in the Silicon Valley area at places like Facebook, Apple, Instagram, Google, and Twitter. So we're very excited about that program, getting them deeply engaged in that. The impact of our alums is pretty fantastic. We do a lot of focus on our undergraduate education at Miami. That's what we're known for. And if we look at LinkedIn, we have more than 1,500 Miami alums that categorize themselves as founders. Over the last 5 years, since 2011, we've brought in more than $2 billion in venture capital money for affiliated high-growth companies coming out of the university with our alums. And thirdly, we had about 94 Miami companies exit that are high-growth companies since 2011. So the role of entrepreneurship, it really plays sort of a big national role today, and universities can add on the research side, which I didn't speak too much about, but I would love to address, and they also can really train and provide innovative curriculums for students to really engage in that kind of enterprise. The outcomes are great. Students can graduate and start companies, which is fantastic, but they can also take those entrepreneurial skills and go off and be great lawyers and work in the medical enterprise and be congresswomen and senators and so forth. And I do believe there's the intangibles that an entrepreneurial kind of education offers that sometimes we don't talk about. We often talk about the skill set. But it creates an environment for them at a university where they can embrace failure, and when they fail, they can embrace it with kind of enthusiasm and optimism, knowing that it's just a step to success. Second of all, it gives you the courage to step out and do something that nobody else has ever done in the world or nobody else has ever succeeded at. And third, it enables our students to think about an idea and bring unity to a concept and also bring unity to a team. And so I'm very happy to be here and report that we are not just counting students who get jobs after graduation. More than 95% of our kids have a job 6 months after graduation. But my new metric is looking at impact on the university and how it impacts society in our country, and so how many jobs that our students create after graduation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kerrigan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velazquez, members of the committee. It's great to be here.
Could you pull the mic a little closer, maybe?
No, actually, I think, oh, this, the whole box.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. How we doing?
Good.
Good.
Much
okay.
better.
Thank you. So my group, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, we're very grateful that the committee has convened this hearing on this very critical issue. Restoring healthier levels of entrepreneurship and new business creation is vital to our country's economic strength and to opportunity in America. Thank you for the invitation to be here. SBE Council, just real quickly, we're a nonprofit advocacy, research, and education organization dedicated to protecting small business, promoting entrepreneurship. For nearly 25 years, we've been working on policy initiatives and private sector initiatives to strengthen the ecosystem for startups and successful small business growth. Our members have testified many times before this committee, and they've seen that their participation and your positive engagement has led to successful policy outcomes in a number of areas: access to capital, tax policy, regulatory relief, government procurement, and more. So we appreciate your continuous work and your ability to actually get things done. That's very much appreciated by our members. Every hearing, every piece of legislation, and your advocacy is very important to building an environment where people want to take risks and pursue the dream of starting a business. John Lettieri, the co-founder of the Economic Innovation Group, he recently participated in our event we had on the Hill, the Startup Policy Forum last month, and he made an observation that I think is worth repeating here. He noted that indeed there is a growing awareness about the trends in entrepreneurship, but there is a lack of connectivity in the policy debate regarding just how severe these trends are and what their implications are for the broader economy. And we think that really needs to change at every level of government and within the business community itself, because entrepreneurship, as you know, is so critical to our country, its dynamism and strength. In a series of gap analysis studies that my organization conducted in the summer and fall of last year, our chief economist, Ray Keating, looked at key gaps in the economy. We looked at gaps in wage growth. We looked at the gaps in private sector investment. We looked at the gap in jobs. And of course, we looked at the gap in entrepreneurship. Keating looked at 3 data points: the incorporated self-employed, unincorporated self-employed, and employer firm data. He looked at the pre-recession high, that's 2008 for each measure as a share of the civilian non-institutional population, and compared those to where we are now, according to the latest data. His findings show that there's a gap of about 3.5 million businesses in America. That is, businesses that simply do not exist because people never started them. An Economic Innovation Group study reinforces our findings, but also finds that new business creation during the 2010-214 recovery was highly concentrated. Their study notes that the 5 metro areas of New York, Miami, Los Angeles, Houston, and Dallas produced as big of an increase in businesses as the rest of the nation combined. And for comparison, the recovery and expansion during the 1983-87 period found much less concentration, with new business creation in 25 metro areas produced the same increase as the rest of the nation. So obviously this has been happening over some time. We know this recovery has been imbalanced. There are those left behind, those who currently think we're still in a recession. And we know this difficult period has left its scars on many. We believe it is showing up, for example, in the big drop-off in entrepreneurship among younger Americans, those aged 18 to 34. I cite several reports in my written testimony: the Millennial Entrepreneurs Study from the SBA Office of Advocacy, a Wall Street Journal report, the latter of which finds that the share of younger people who own private businesses has reached a 24-year low. Now, there are some groups, and there's some positive news, some groups and sectors of the population that have bucked this trend. where entrepreneurship remains stronger is growing. Entrepreneurs aged 55 to 64 made up for 25% of all new entrepreneurs in 2016, and that's up from 14.8% in 1996. Immigrant entrepreneurs continue to show strength as they account for 30% of new entrepreneurs. So, you know, there's obviously some bad news on the entrepreneurship front, but I do think there's a lot to be hopeful for in the future. At the state and local level, there's a tremendous amount of policy changes and initiatives that are focusing on lowering barriers and providing support to help people start businesses. In terms of the states of the two witnesses here, I mean, both of their states rank in the top 10 in terms of from a policy environment, but that took a lot of hard work in terms of keeping taxes low, streamlining regulations, engaging the business community, and making those places great places to start business. Business leaders and successful entrepreneurs are stepping up and bringing their capital, know-how, energy, and networks back into their communities and cities to help rebuild and revitalize areas that particularly need help. We heard a great success story from Dan Gilbert, the founder and chairman of Quicken Loans, at our policy forum, where he's really pumping billions of dollars back into Detroit and making that a great place for people to live and obviously for new entrepreneurs. There's great news on the broadband front, a whole lot of things that are going on. We just need more of this activity to happen, and certainly Congress has a role to play in terms of tax, regulatory, and healthcare reform as well. So I look forward to discussing these things with you in the committee.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Mr. Shah, can you recognize for 5 minutes?
Good morning, Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. My name is Joe Shotkin, and as the president and founder of Broadmark Capital, I've spent my entire career on new company formation, capitalization, and development. I'm very pleased this committee is willing to tackle this vitally important subject of reversing the entrepreneurial decline. At the same time, we also need to accelerate our economic growth, create high-wage jobs, build an economy that offers opportunity for all, and compete effectively in the face of increasing globalization and automation. The solution to these problems is to unleash the power of our innovation economy. That's where all the new net jobs get created. And the good news is that there's some pretty simple answers. The answers come from the Jobs Act, which I had the honor of working with members of Congress and the Obama administration to pass. I say pretty simple because that law passed with broad bipartisan support. And it showed that some minor policy tweaks will produce the capital that unleashes the innovation economy and does it without creating problems. So here are some immediate solutions that we should all be able to agree on to remedy this decline. First, fix general solicitation. $70 billion of capital was raised in the first 27 months following the Jobs Act, almost all of which went into additional capital into small companies and new projects, spurring job growth. And that was done under the severe regulatory burden of third-party verification. Go back to the previous standard of self-certification, which was never a problem, and that $70 billion number will grow instantly and exponentially. Next, fixed equity crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is an important and useful tool, especially for attracting capital to our struggling inner cities and capital-starved regions. It has failed because the SEC's unworkable regulations have limited its potential. Make it simpler and more attractive for small companies to do IPOs. Costs and regulatory burdens continue to make the traditional IPO path unattractive for small companies. The Jobs Act took a small step to correct this, and we need to do more. Expand the pool of accredited investors by allowing people to become accredited through educational and employment qualifications. Finally, here's a novel idea. Let early-stage companies raise additional capital by selling their net operating losses. Let them leverage their hard-won capital. In many cases, that will make a difference between success and failure. These are simple, short-term fixes that will have a major and quick impact on reversing entrepreneurial decline and create real growth in the American economy. But we also need to address the bigger, harder, long-term systemic issues that impede our innovation economy. For that, we should create a commission on the innovation economy. Bring in the best and brightest venture, academic, legal, and experienced entrepreneurs to advise the Congress, White House, and the agencies. A bill to do this is being introduced in both houses, and we encourage its immediate adoption. This commission should be tasked with addressing some of these difficult long-term systemic issues, such as bringing back the small regional IPOs. We used to have small IPOs for the regional manufacturers and retailers, which would create regional jobs and spread economic growth more equally across the country. Spread venture capital more evenly across the country, and expand opportunities for women and minorities. The regional, gender, and racial imbalance is a real problem and contributes to the economic and political stress in this country. The number of venture firms in this country is down by 50%, starving the innovation economy of the $5 and $10 million A-round financings designed to bring the experience and management expertise of venture professionals to follow the initial seed and angel financings. Our leaders are just beginning to acknowledge the problems created by a 50% decline in the number of public companies. Increasing the number of public companies would boost jobs, enhance transparency, lower the cost of capital, and make pricing more efficient. So there's a formula for reversing our entrepreneurial decline. Move quickly to solve the easier near-term issues and create a commission of the best and brightest around the innovation economy to solve the tougher long-term issues. The American innovation economy has long been the envy of the world. The countries that envy us now are investing deeply to compete with us, and we need to respond. Thank you for taking the time to address this vital issue. I look forward to working with you on solutions, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And I'll begin with myself. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Crawford, I'll start with you first. So just how great is Miami University of Ohio?
Well, since you ask.
No, my real question. As an entrepreneur yourself, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned as a co-founder of 2 startup companies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think there were several areas. I was a physicist, number one, and when I started my first company, I thought, you know, I can do quantum mechanics, therefore I can do accounting, and boy, was I wrong. And so I really learned how to actually pull together a team and bring unity around something that's very transdisciplinary and requires all types of expertise, and you just simply can't do it on your own. The second area was just how much inertia is out there in the marketplace, and you fight against change, and if it's disruptive change, it's even more difficult to kind of move the needle forward. But as one of my mentors put it, if there's no inertia, you probably don't have a very good idea, which was actually absolutely right. And then the third area, I think, just on the personal side, as a physicist, you can kind of over-engineer everything, and so the mentorship on really how to bring simplicity to your product, I think, is very important. And so, but what I did learn overall when you look at entrepreneurship and you look at it from your company's perspective or building it through the university is just how important the partnerships are. If you don't have that ecosystem, if you don't have the infrastructure in place that you can go to the intellectual property attorney, the corporate attorney, you can go to the venture capital, the angel investment firm, or your local state for seed funding, you just can't make it all work. So the most important thing I would say learning is how to actually develop those partnerships and move forward in a more strategic way with both your state and the country.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kerrigan, I'll go to you next. In your written testimony, you stated that risk aversion after the financial crisis has become an issue preventing Americans oftentimes from taking on risk and starting new businesses. What solutions would you suggest to potential entrepreneurs to ease their anxiety in starting a business? How would you address that?
Well, I think it all starts with the economic climate and, you know, bringing back sort of robust, you know, economic growth in the country. I think once there is that traction and there's sustainable growth, you're going to have more private sector investment, you're going to have more job growth, more quality job growth. I mean, things will just brighten up overall. And so, you know, if you have that breakthrough, sort of that light, you know, in the economy where there is, you know, sort of more confidence and more optimism, I think it will bring more people off the sidelines and take those risks. There was the, you know, I talked about the millennial generation, and particularly, I think in my written testimony, why this generation might be so risk averse. But I was very heartened to see an American Small Business Development Center survey that they just released in May of 2017 that found that 50% of millennials plan to open businesses in the next 3 years. Well, wow, that would be terrific, you know, for our economy. So we need to enable that. We need to encourage that. But the two things that, you know, the two barriers that stood out at me are issues that this committee has dealt with, access to capital being a key issue, and the other, which was a surprise. They don't know where to go to start a business. You know, I think really building out the ecosystem, making sure, you know, the policy environment has to be right, access to capital, you know, access to markets, and then access, you know, to education and information that people have that can successfully start and scale their business.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shotkin, are there any particular regulations that you would like to see revised or removed that would especially help entrepreneurs or small businesses generally?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would go back to my testimony. We suggested a series of minor regulatory changes that would have a dramatic impact on the innovation economy. They build on our learnings from the Jobs Act. I mean, you know, take general solicitation. I mean, $70 billion. You know, you create a general solicitation in the Jobs Act, and $70 billion of capital was directed into new companies and new projects across the country. And that's with basically 1.5 hands tied behind our back because of this third-party verification requirement. So Congress has accepted the notion of general solicitation. The SEC wrote a set of regulations that effectively fixed a problem that did not exist. There was no third-party verification before required for these securities. And you know, you won't find anything in the literature that said it was a problem. The problem got created, and even with that major impediment to capital formation, $70 billion of new capital, and lack of access to capital is one of the most significant factors in impeding the innovation economy. So I've given you an outline of a couple of easy things to fix, and also outlined some long-term issues that I think are terribly important.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shotkin, can we go back again to the concentration of capital, access to capital in terms of geographic areas, not only about debt financing, but venture capital? How do you see, or what role can we play in addressing that issue? It is one that constantly, you know, we bring up to the Small Business Administration, even the VC program that we have at SBA, are doing a poor job in reaching every corner of America, particularly rural America and minority and women-owned businesses.
You could not be more correct. And let me begin with a really startling statistic. Since the '08 recession, 50% of new business formation in the United States has come from 0.64% of the counties in the United States. Fully 50% of new businesses came from 20 of 3,100 counties across the United States. That is a total concentration of economic, you know, growth in just a very small set of areas. Let me give you one other statistic. 50% of all venture capital last year went to one state. So this problem is a really serious problem. And as a business guy, it does not come easily for me to suggest that there's a federal role here. But I'm going to suggest that I think there is. We used to have an SBIC program where the SBIC sponsored venture capital funds around the country. We in the industry viewed it as a successful program.
Right.
It was viewed as unsuccessful because the bonds weren't paid off by the investments that were made. And my view is the study that proved that was a poorly done study. Because, you know, in fact, the debts were not paid back. But in doing that calculation, nobody bothered to take into account the taxes that had been generated by those companies and by those employees. And so I think part of the answer to your question is bring back that SBIC program.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Crawford, would you like to comment?
Thank you. Could you repeat the question, please?
Well, it is how, if there is any role for us, you know, let's talk not even about the face of the economy.
Right.
Is changing. More women are
Sure.
creating jobs and business formation.
Yep.
But also the minority businesses. How can we improve access to capital, not only debt financing, but venture capital?
Sure,
We
I
see the role that $2 billion in VC
Yeah.
did to the kind of impact that it had in your program.
It has, and I would say another thing, coming from my perspective at a university as well, is that some of the ideas that we have are very early on. They're very embryonic in a sense, and so we have to kind of get them to the level where you can even be in a Series A kind of round. And so personally have been the beneficiary and know many other people that have on the SBIR programs and the STTR programs. So that early kind of seed non-dilutive capital through grants, I think, is a great way to take some of those big ideas that we have to get to the next stage and get to the prototyping stage, and how that would work out, I think, would be great from that perspective. And also, I do like your idea of just reimbursing students for debt if they go into, you know, venture. If they go into small businesses and so forth. I think that's just a fantastic idea.
Thank you.
On how to move that forward.
Thank you. Ms. Kerrigan, tax reform remains a high priority, but also an elusive one, even in this Congress. So members on this committee understand the importance of keeping the interests of small firms and entrepreneurs in mind as we approach tax discussion. How could simply updating thresholds and adjusting them for inflation annually help create a better entrepreneurial environment?
I think that's a great question. And for example, if you look at and I'm talking about the tiniest businesses here that just start up, and if you look at the self-employment threshold, for example, where you start, you know, paying self-employment tax at $400, that hasn't been updated since the 1950s. And if you had if that had kept pace with inflation or whatever they do, that would be over $6,000 right now. I mean, there's a lot of complexity with that. It's a big turnoff, particularly for young entrepreneurs. I'm talking people that start businesses that are 15, 16 years old. I mean, that's their this is the tax code, this is what I'm going to have to deal with. So that's just one idea, I think, of a threshold that the Congress can look at and to update and to modernize.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Gentle ladies, time's expired. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who is the vice chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. As the ranking member indicated, there's a number of concerns that we have with regards to small businesses, and you know, we've talked about taxes, regulations, broadband last week, and then access to capital is what has been discussed with the two previous questioners. And to me, this is a really key situation, because you really can't. You may have a great idea, but until you can get the money to put it in place to operate your business, you're stuck. And so, you know, it's interesting, Mr. Shah, you mentioned that 50% of all venture capital went to one state last year. Can you explain why? They just got all the brain power there to come up with all the ideas, or that where they have all the money, or they have both, or how does this all work?
Well, first of all, 50% went to one state. But second, and just as consequential, there has been a 50% decline in the number of venture firms in this country. There has not been a decline in the amount of capital managed in the industry. So the number of firms is down by 50%. What that means is the firms are making fewer, larger, and later stage investments. And those are concentrated in just a couple of these markets. And that is one of the most important long-term systemic issues that we should be addressing.
One of the things that you also mentioned in your testimony was with regards to regional IPOs.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit? That's kind of an interesting concept to me. I like to delve into that just a little bit. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Well, I'm old. When I grew up,
That makes two of us.
the way I grew up in this industry, we had small regional IPOs. Today, every IPO, virtually every IPO, is $100 million or larger. And there are many small companies across this country, small regional manufacturers, craft brewers, small manufacturing companies. The $25 million IPO has gone away. It's gone away.
For that is?
Well, there are lots of reasons for it. You know, my suggestion is we create this commission to figure out what the answers are. But you've lost the regional investment banking firms. You know, you used to have regional investment banking firms across the country. Now you've got a couple of major national banking firms. And so because of that concentration of capital in larger firms, because of regulatory requirements, because of costs, because of decimalization, there are a whole series of reasons why the regional IPOs have gone away. And one of our most important tasks should be to bring back those regional IPOs. That's one of the ways to create, you know, jobs around the country. And I mean, I'm not sure I've got the magic answer for that one, but it is such an important issue. It should be one of the major long-term systemic issues that we address.
Well, I deal a lot with the community banks and, and banking folks in general with one of the other communities I serve on. And, you know, one of the things that we've seen is we really have got a kind of a two-tiered economy going right now, where we have the big banks and big companies doing well, and you have the small banks and small companies that are kind of struggling. And a lot of it goes back to regulatory costs and of compliance that the small banks are having to deal with, and then they pass those costs on to their small lenders, to their small borrowers, and it makes it more difficult, number one, to afford the loan, and number two, the regulatory environment that we're in makes it more difficult for the small banks to actually give a loan to small businesses as well. So that it's kind of a 1-2 punch there. The problem is if we don't have a way to generate some economic activity and some access to capital for our entrepreneurs, we're going to dry up as a country. We wonder why our employment numbers are stagnating, and we had this discussion this morning with some folks at the Fed. And you know, it's pretty simple to me. The small businesses are where the generation of jobs are, and if you don't have small businesses, you don't generate the jobs. But I know one of the other things I want to talk about, you had mentioned crowdfunding in your testimony, and also I know now we had somebody I think testify in this committee with PayPal now has small business online lending. There's a lot of other options out there. How viable are those options for entrepreneurs?
Well, I think, I know Mr. Shotkin said, well, crowdfunding has been a disaster, like Title III crowdfunding, but there is a positive story to tell here. There's been 400 offerings to date in Title III crowdfunding, and that was sort of the Title III was really meant to focus on these startups and these smaller businesses. And, you do have some businesses that have been successful at raising, $1 million plus. There's also a diversity of businesses that are raising money through crowdfunding. I think food and beverage is the top category. You have entertainment and media, transportation. So I think the early signs are really good. And also PricewaterhouseCoopers just released a survey that showed women were better at crowdfunding. So this is, I think, really very positive. It comes down to, I think, some regulatory relief, the SEC, and perhaps things that Congress can do to make this right. Lift some of the cost on those small businesses who want to use crowdfunding through their CF filing and all the compliance they have to do, and make it more practical. And I think you can really build from some of these successes that you would see, and also work against or help in terms of this concentration, this density of capital as well, using these platforms that businesses everywhere can use.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Snyder, is ranking member of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Shabbat and the ranking member Velasquez for holding this hearing, and thanks to you for all you do, but for joining us today to share your thoughts. We've talked a lot about the fact that entrepreneurship, small business startup, new business startup numbers are down and dramatically down and have been declining for a while. And reversing this decline obviously is something very important to grow our economy, because as was noted, 2/3 of the jobs in this country are created by these small businesses. From the beginning, if these businesses are going to succeed, they need to have the resources, the access to capital, the access to talent, the skill set that will create these well-paying jobs. to create more investments, to create the virtuous circle. Mr. Shockin, as you touched, we've moved away from the regional development, and we have this great concentration in a few places. But I also think we need to invest in education in schools. And Dr. Crawford, you talk about in college, and I love the fact that we're permeating the entrepreneurial spirit into every class, but we need to get that into high schools and middle schools, I think, and create it earlier, because if you think about what is an entrepreneur, or the definition of an entrepreneur, and there are many academic definitions, for me it's someone who has a vision, a dream, and the will and passion to pursue that dream, to take that risk, and there is an element of risk-taking. But entrepreneurs, is my experience from 20 years in business working with entrepreneurs has demonstrated, they also have blind spots. And I don't mean that in a bad way. These are people who don't see barriers, who don't see stop signs, who aren't willing to accept no from people who can't say yes, and go out and try to do that. But that spirit seems to be declining. My worry is we're seeing a diminishing of that can-do attitude, belief in the American economy that defined the 20th century as the American century. And if we're going to make the 21st century an American century as well, among the many other things we have to do, I believe it has to be driving this entrepreneurial spirit across the entire country. So I didn't know the number about was it 0.0%?
0.64.
0.64% of the counties. And you hear this discussion of the struggling rural economies. Well, if we can start up businesses in these rural economies, if we can create, and I've had the privilege of introducing legislation, promote the hubs and the ecosystems and create the incubators that will help companies go from the idea to startup to step out to success. And I didn't mean to give a speech, but I'm passionate about this.
It was a fine speech, by the way.
Thank you. So, Dr. Crawford, I'll start with you in this idea of instilling the spirit. You're a physicist, I'm an engineer. That science helps, but you talked about the fact that you didn't know about accounting, but you thought you could do it. How do we help these people, and it's not just young people, it's people of all ages, to get over the hump that maybe I don't know how to do it, but I know how to learn and I know how to ask questions? How do we get that spirit instilled?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I really do believe that entrepreneurship is a mindset. It's sort of how you tackle and solve problems. It's not necessarily a discipline in and of itself. But one of the areas which I see both at the college level and, as you mentioned, the high school level, is that I don't think that we prepare students how to fail and then how to kind of move forward with failure. So if you want to have that be naive and move forward and break down walls and move bust it down rather than trying to go over, you really need to try things and fail, and then how to kind of repurpose yourself and redirect and know it's a stepping stone and a way in which you'll pivot and go to a new direction. I think high schools is a good place for that. I think colleges is an exceptionally great place for that, because you're surrounded by mentorship and you're surrounded by people that can help you sort of get through the messiness of entrepreneurship. So I'm in complete agreement with you, but the one thing I would say, and it sounds kind of funny, but we really need to teach our youth how to fail and how to move forward, because that's all about the entrepreneurial mindset. When you hear successful entrepreneurs, they don't be successful on their very first time. It's 2, 3, 4 times, and they talk about that failure. So how do we teach it and learn it, and how do we pull that creativity in?
Yeah, it's the difference between failure and defeat. And,
Yes.
John Wooden, the great basketball coach, said, "I never lost a game, I just ran out of time."
Exactly.
And I think failure is that lesson. Mr. Shockin, in the last few moments I have, is the culture of failure is unacceptable affecting the ability for small firms, new businesses to raise capital, because the idea of we have to succeed becomes such a paramount issue for them?
The problem for the innovation economy is access to capital and regulations. If we solve those problems, we'll get back to creating the kind of vibrant economy where there is success and failure becomes less of a factor. We've got to create the jobs, and the other reason we have to create these jobs is you're all dealing with the onsets of globalization and automation, and you know what's coming down the road. I mean, that genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the onset. I think we're in the midst of it, and we need
We
to lead
are, and it's only going to accelerate.
Right.
And therefore, unleashing the innovation economy to create the jobs that are needed is absolutely essential. And as someone who has worked in this industry my entire career, the answer is around access to capital and some minor regulatory reform. That's how you make this industry succeed, and that's how you address these economic disparity issues.
Great thing. I'm out of time, and thank you for the extension. I yield
Thank you.
back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's chairman of the Subcommittee on Agricultural, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. Mr. Shockin, I am very intrigued by your ideas of simpler IPOs and other means of financing startups. My little software company in Iowa that started as 3 people in a basement went public in the mid-90s, and we were one of those $30 million IPOs you referred to. Piper Jaffray out of Minneapolis and William Blair out of Chicago were our co-lead underwriters. And I'll never forget the days of sitting in a high-rise in Chicago at Sidley Austin, a law firm of 2,000 attorneys, good firm. But at $1,000 an hour per attorney, there's probably 10 of them in the room. We were running up a bill of $10,000 an hour. And the process that it took to put together a prospectus and a red herring and initially go public was fascinating, but overwhelming, I think, to most small entrepreneurs. Can you give me some ideas? The regional IPO is an excellent idea. I couldn't agree with you more. Do you have other ideas about financing options? I know there's, well, I used to call them vulture capitalists. I know there's venture capitalists out there, which we managed to go public without using their services. But are there other ideas you have? Because it intrigues me, and it's much needed. I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you, and congratulations on that success.
Thank you.
That's a good story. Love to hear those kind of stories. You know, what happens when there's an economic event, the laws tend to overreact. And it's the smaller companies that get punished when that happens. And you'll remember what happened at the end of the 1990s when the tech bubble burst. And the reaction congressionally was Sarbanes-Oxley. And what happened was they swept the small companies in under the bigger companies in terms of regulatory requirements for doing IPOs. And those have just become so costly and so burdensome. The accounting requirements and the undertakings required, where your small company would have been subject to the same kind of accounting and legal standards as the Boeings and Exxons of the world.
It's crazy.
Yes. And so we took a step towards resolving that problem in the Jobs Act by creating a couple of minor benefits for the smaller companies. Unfortunately, it hasn't been as useful for bringing back the IPOs as we would have hoped. And the reason for that is because of low interest rates. Low interest rates having drawn so much capital into private equity, that private equity has turned out to be a very strong competitor to going public. But at the same time, we've got to really answer this question. How do you bring back the smaller IPOs? Because there are lots of great little companies that, for which a $25 million IPO means another 200 or 400 employees. And it's one of the ways of solving this problem of the regional concentration. And there are answers to that. And that's why I designed, in my testimony, here are some easy short-term fixes that we can do. But then here are some longer-term systemic issues that really need attention. And to me, you do those two things and you'll unleash this innovation economy. But you've got to bring back those $25 million IPOs as one of the answers.
We did this in Iowa, by the way, and I tried to coin the phrase Silicon Valley. I don't know if it stuck or not, Mr. Chairman. Question for Mr. Crawford. Are young people, are the millennials, young people in general, becoming risk adverse?
It's a great question. I think it goes back to some of the earlier comments that we had about failure, and if if you're ready to really work in that kind of environment where you may fail 3 or 4 times before you succeed. I'm not necessarily convinced that they're risk adverse, but I must say that there's one thing is when we trained these entrepreneurial kids at the university level, and we'd love for them to go out and start small businesses and so forth, but what we do see is that the bigger companies, the Fortune 500s and so forth, are gobbling those kids up because they really see those entrepreneurial skills as being very valuable to their larger organization in an entrepreneurial way, that they can walk and get through things. And so I think it's kind of, it's hard to say whether it's risk averse or not, because even though they may not end up in a small company or a small startup, they are able to go work in some of the bigger firms these days, which are becoming more entrepreneurial in and of itself.
I have 8 seconds left. We can't do another question. Yeah. I yield my 5 seconds back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Velasquez. Very typical restaurant district in New York. We are working to increase access to necessary capital for all our entrepreneurs. This last week, Ranking Member. Thank you. That's better? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Just last week, the Ranking Member Velasquez and I had a small business summit, which was focusing on connecting small businesses with owners, with agencies both at the federal, state, and city level, to assist them in their road to starting and growing a small business. And we noticed that a good number of the folks that participated were young people with questions regarding establishing and supporting their small businesses. And this is no doubt, this has shown that there's a high interest still in young entrepreneurs in succeeding, yet they are failing, as you have mentioned, in accessing capital, finding a pathway to the necessary capital that will make their business successful and sustainable. And in a time where we work in the technology and research fields, this is quickly advancing, yet IPOs are down. We need to be focusing on how to better supply our entrepreneurs with the capital they need to succeed and ultimately create jobs and grow our economy. But you've mentioned that some of the hurdles that these small entrepreneurs have are the overregulation that often is overburdening small businesses and particularly startup businesses, and the tax inequities that exist. They're saddled with these tax inequities that they're unable to sort of like get some oxygen out of the tunnel and continue to move forward. So as we move as a Congress in this session to potentially consider hopefully some tax reform legislation, what real precise recommendations do you have for tax reform that will help small businesses? It will be a real travesty if we engage in tax reform and only like the big corporations walk out of here with their pockets full, and small businesses again continue to struggle with overregulation and tax inequities. What real recommendations do you have for easing the pain with regards to tax inequities and regulation itself? Any one of you?
Sure. And thank you for pulling together that summit with business owners or potential business owners and entrepreneurs, because, you know, as I mentioned in my testimony, many of them don't know where to go. I know the SBA administrator is out traveling the country and sort of promoting the SBA as a resource and getting the word out about that, but certainly we have a long way to go in terms of telling them where to turn. I think on tax reform, look, I think from a small business perspective is very simple. I mean, we do have to keep small businesses at the center of tax reform. So we need to lower individual rates along with corporate rates. We need to lower taxes, definitely a more simplified system. And again, updating, I think some of these thresholds is going to matter to small entrepreneurs. And you know, complexity, I think, is really the key thing that has to be addressed. So if you get rid of a lot of the loopholes, but for example, allow for full expensing. I mean, again, it all boils down to simplicity and these lower rates that, again, are going to make the system, I think, more competitive. So simplify, lower rates. You know, there's a lot of great ideas out there, updating, modernizing, and just certainty in the tax code as well, not changing it all the time, I think is very, very important from a small business perspective.
Okay. If I could. Yes, go ahead. Yes, Mr. Shokin.
So first of all, I gave you a suggestion in my testimony when I said allow these young companies to sell their net operating losses. They have to work terribly hard to raise capital. Those losses sit on their balance sheet, don't do them any good. If they could sell that, that would be a way of really leveraging the equity they have created. And I know from my own experience, in many cases, that would make the difference between success and failure. The first thing I would say. The second thing I would say, for the kind of businesses that you are talking about, equity crowdfunding is just enormously important. If someone's going to start a business and their friends and their cousins and the people in other states that they know will want to own a portion of that business, the ability to invest in that business, whether it's a neighborhood bakery, a small manufacturing company, to raise that money via equity across the country under equity crowdfunding, under a reasonable set of rules different than what we have today, would make an enormous difference. And the third thing, it really is, you got to somehow simplify the regulations. You know, that people want to start their businesses, they want to bake their breads, they want to deliver, they want to do whatever they want to do, and they get just buried under the city, the state, the county, and all the various regulatory requirements. Make that simple for small businesses. You're correct wanting to keep these benefits away from big businesses. I agree with you. Whether it's selling the net operating losses or whether it's simplifying, you can do that for the small businesses, and it would make an enormous economic difference in this country.
The gentleman's time is expired.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, who used to be the new guy on the committee, but now he's been around a couple of weeks, so he's an old hand now. Let's recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each one of you for coming. In our role as in Congress, you know, there's no shortage of the need for public-private partnerships, but in many cases you see where the public is the one that gets the short end of the stick. What would you say that we could put in, safeguards that we could put in, benchmarks, to make sure that any dollar that the taxpayer invests, there is a return on the investment? And failure is a great teacher. But from our role, what would you say we do to make sure that there's a return on investment, that it's a smart investment, and not doled out to either one state or one group? And it's for each one of you.
Well, earlier I had said that one of the ideas for dealing with driving capital into rural and other counties across the country is to reestablish the small business investment program at the SBA. So specifically to your question, how do you avoid losses by the government? The answer is to have each of those investments be partnered with private venture capital or private equity firms, where the government is not making the win-lose decisions on each investment, but they're doing it in partnership with private capital. And that discipline would have an enormously positive impact on government money being invested in the correct companies that have a chance to succeed.
That sounds good to me.
As a follow-up, you know, typically with the SBA, they're the last to get paid. The equity, the repayment of equity comes back from the private investors.
No, SBA gets paid back first. Absolutely.
In every case?
Well, under the original SBA program, the SBA was the debt. The win that was there was for the private investors, but the government always got their money back first. I was trying to address your question, how do you avoid the government making the wrong decisions? And I think the way to do that is through, what you would call a public-private partnership, that each of these investments are only in investments that are vetted by private capital, where they do the due diligence. So let's say the government is 40% of the investment and private capital is 60% of the investment. Government gets its money back first. The government is the lender in this situation. The upside, the real potential, is to the private capital, but the government gets its capital back first. It's exactly how you should design a program like that.
I agree.
Generally, I will just say this, being that I really am not an expert in public-private partnerships, but you know, going back to our gap analysis reports that I talked about, we looked at private sector investment. And over the past decade, there's been a dearth of $1.5 trillion we really have a problem with private sector investment in this country. So the more that we can encourage investment on the private side, perhaps the less we need it on the public side. So I think policies really need to get back to encouraging private sector investments, incentives, and that, you know, that's going to happen through tax reform. I think it's going to happen through regulatory relief across the board, including, you know, in the financial services sector. We just need more people investing more of their dollars. I mean, really letting go and investing not only in our startups and our small business, but our economy, their own, you know, their own companies, you know, to really get the economy going again.
And I agree with that. I think that the companion type of grants that they're talking about, how to bring the public and private together, could also work at the research level as well with some of the federal governments and their research enterprises to bring those early seed ideas out of the place and having them sort of the due diligence done by the private side as well as the public side. And I think it's the big question is also where you're going to put your dollars on the federal side. Where's the risk assessment going to be? Is it going to be where the ideas are so early on and you're only going to get 1 out of 10, or are you going to be down further on in the Series B and C rounds of venture capital where you're going to have a much higher probability of success?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Murphy, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Workforce, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Fascinating testimony. Mr. Crawford, I really enjoyed reading through your testimony as well as hearing you talk about the Miami University and all of the initiatives that you have launched to help build the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators. And my colleagues on this committee have heard me talk about similar incubators and apprenticeship programs that have been launched by universities and colleges in my district in Florida, specifically at the University of Central Florida, Rollins College, and Valencia College. So I completely agree with you that universities play a vital role in the startup ecosystem. And if that sounded like a shameless plug, it was. My first question is for either Dr. Crawford or Ms. Kerrigan. You know, as we look at the future of work and think about the startup ecosystem, the way that the workforce is engaging with the workplace is changing, particularly in the startup ecosystem. And even I think the dynamics and demographics of the workforce is changing. So right now, about 1/3 of the workforce is millennial. By 2020, I think about 50% of the workforce will be millennials. And we're moving away from sort of the idea of working for one large corporation for the period of your entire life. When it comes to benefits and the other sorts of programs that are normally provided through that type of employment, what do you think we could do, what can Congress do to adjust to these changes in what work will look like, particularly as as it relates to the startup ecosystem?
I mean, that's a great point, because I mean, I think you're talking about the gig economy, right? Yes. And really this desire to do your own thing and to. I mean, there's some people that really like that arrangement a lot, but they really do wish they would have the benefits that go along with full-time work. I think there's a lot that can be done. Hopefully or potentially on the portability front. And I would encourage the Congress to look at things a little more innovatively as well. Say, for example, that you do have an independent contractor who wants to be independent or wants to stay independent and perhaps is working for, a larger enterprise or a larger business. Is there any way that they can, tap into their benefits without losing that independent contractor status, right? If both of them agree, he wants to be or she wants to be independent, but, I value, this person, work. So is that a possibility? Sort of looking at the independent contractor test and making that a little bit more flexible. I mean, that's one idea that I can, that I think of right now.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it's interesting. I mean, on the front end, when you graduate college and you get out there and, benefits and so forth aren't a big deal. We see the kids that are going out to San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and they'll spend every little last penny of their disposable income on rent. And it doesn't matter to them. And we've seen the uptick in in the crowd of 55 plus in the entrepreneurship, so they're more stable and they can actually get out there. And I think one of the questions is when you graduate school, you go off and work 3 to 5 to 8 years. How do we get those folks back in after they've worked at a big company, and how they get them back into the startup economy? And I think that's when benefits plays a big role. People have families and so forth, other responsibilities, and so how you could kind of be innovative on that front as a Congress in terms of pulling them back in, or how we call it in Cincinnati, the boomerang effect, where we can pull the 30-somethings back into the entrepreneurial economy.
And I think anyway that we can allow independent contractors to either, you know, if they're joining some type of business group or some type of association, if there or some type of entity, you know, that, you know, where they can pool, whether it's healthcare, whether it's retirement benefits, or et cetera. I think that would be a great solution as well. I know that would take some regulatory changes at the federal and probably state level as well. But I think, you know, having those places, you know, where independent contractors can go, where they can, again, use sort of the collective power of all of them to negotiate, you know, for better prices for healthcare, et cetera, or to share their risks, I think would be ideal.
That's great. And just another sort of a follow-up question. There's been some talk about how the millennials don't really know where to go, the know-how for starting up a business. I know we try to address it a bit in some of the universities and school systems, but there are also SBA entrepreneurial development programs, and this committee has done a lot to try to enhance those programs. How do you think we can enhance the programs so that they're meeting the needs of millennial entrepreneurs and that they're more accessible or readily available, or they know more about them?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, in terms of a lot of the programs that the SBA or educational programs that the SBA provides, you know, both nationally and then within the SBD, I think, you know, we really need to look at this and see, you know, the way that millennials and younger people are getting their information is there that connectivity? Yeah. You know, so I think that's critical. How do we reach them? So I think all the programs need to be looked at to sort of, you know, go where these people get their information, and, you know, using more social media, using sort of the next thing that comes along. I know it continually changes in terms of the platforms that they use, but I do think that we do need to get a little bit more innovative in terms of how we reach, but also the programs themselves. Are we staying relevant in terms of what's happening in the marketplace and the training that's actually provided?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's a ranked member of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez, and thank you all for your testimony and being here today. I spent 40 years on a college campus, small campus in Greensboro, North Carolina, Bennett College. So we're always looking for new ways to do things. But I want to thank you, Mr. Crawford, for with serving in the capacity that you do and what you do for students. And I wanted to ask you what you would recommend to those colleges or universities with smaller budgets, lower endowments, to cultivate business leaders and to promote entrepreneurship among their graduates.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the entrepreneurship programs, in many ways, when you get faculty members that are entrepreneurial of them and of themselves and students that are entrepreneurial, they'll actually create the programs just like they were a true entrepreneur out in the marketplace. And so in many cases, I think when you have that kind of entrepreneurship on campus, you can kind of do things on a shoestring and so forth. And I think the way that we have done it at Miami and the way that my past experiences at other fine institutions has really been through the partnerships that we created both with the city and the state and the federal government and so forth, because the resources go a lot further. And universities, you should never underestimate that you have what the marketplace wants, and that's talent, talent, talent. And so to use that talent as a way in which you can offset or fund entrepreneurship programs through those relationships with corporate and industry.
Thank you. So your institution was successful in developing your ecosystem. Did Miami have any contact with Small Business Administration in setting up your programs?
Yeah, historically it has, yes. And then also, you know, we do work with our students too to get the word out on the various programs for the SBA and so forth. and the other programs that are available through the federal government for those startup companies.
So did they offer their services, or did you partner with them, or did you seek them out?
I think we sought them out on the front end, and then of late, we've been doing a lot more work also with our local chambers and the ones in the state, and how we actually get the word out. And then working with the Minority Accelerator Chamber also to get for women and minority-owned businesses. And so we've been making the connections not just at the federal level, but all throughout the state.
Thank you. Mr. Is it Shockton?
Shocking.
Shockton. The difficulties that minority-owned and women-owned businesses encounter trying to obtain capital for their businesses is well documented. However, venture capital seems to be particularly difficult to obtain. One report suggests that women-owned businesses drew only 5% of all U.S. venture capital. In your testimony, you outlined recommendations to address the geographic concentration of venture capital and the concentration of control of venture capital. But do you have any recommendations to address venture capital's lack of investment in minority and women-owned businesses?
Thank you. Great question. And I have two answers to you. I mean, the first answer is cut the innovation economy loose. Do the kind of capital, access to capital proposals that we've made, because it will benefit everybody in that ecosystem. That's the general answer. The specific answer is that we have this tremendous concentration of venture in this one state, and this lack of venture capital availability to minorities, to women, and geographically around the country. In my view, that is a role for the federal government. And in my view, you bring back the SBIC program, and you specifically target it to those states, regions, women, and minorities that have had such difficulty accessing capital. It is such an important issue, and clearly the private marketplace is not able to answer it themselves. It is therefore, in my opinion, and I'm a business guy, this does not come naturally to me, it is a correct and proper role for the federal government to step back in, and I think that's the answer.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. And the chair would note that we've been joined by Chad Pergram, who not only is a Capitol Hill correspondent for Fox News, but more importantly, President Dr. Crawford mentioned the internship program, and Chad heads up the Inside Washington program, which many Capitol Hill offices have taken advantage of over the year. And the Small Business Committee actually has an intern at this time, Nick Tracewell, who's also in the back of the room here. So we are definitely benefiting from Miami's program here, and gave Fox News a plug, I guess, but that wasn't the intention. We wanted to recognize the how it's working here on Capitol Hill. And I apologize to Mr. Lawson for I'm not taking up any of his time, but I did want to get that in before he went on. So thank you. Our final questioner, I think, is the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, who's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, who's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to welcome a hurricane to a section of Florida. I'm up in Tallahassee. You know, we always enjoy bringing the hurricanes up and sending them back where they belong in South Florida. You know, and I see a Florida State tie over there. Yeah, but my question is centered around 36 years ago. I was going into small business, and I was trying to only access. I think it was $10,000 or $15,000 to go into small. I was leaving coaching at FSU, you know, and said I'm going into small business. And so, as a result, my question always centered around is the access to capital, because, and I really didn't understand at the time. The only thing I had was a FHA loan for about $121,000 on a house, you know, and that was blocking me from getting the access to the capital, even though the payment was only about $131 a month, you know. And so how can we work together, do they work together So 36 years later, you know, I was still in the business till I got hauled off to Congress, you know. So so my concern is that the way I have this question here is to how can communities, partners, including local government entities and banks to guarantee that those who want to start small business have the resources to do so, including the main question is access to capital. And that's all I really needed. They were asking me to get someone to stand for the loan, you know, and I didn't really have the access that I needed then, but ever since then, the main question has been, how do people like myself those years back have access to capital to either start a small business?
Well, if your question is how do we guarantee that access to capital, I don't think there is an answer.
Okay.
But I would begin an answer by pointing to equity crowdfunding. That's specifically what equity crowdfunding was designed to do. For the smaller businesses, whether they're neighborhood bakeries or small manufacturers, that was the goal of equity crowdfunding, so that you could bring together people who could then own a stake in that business. That's an extremely important concept. You see the success of Kickstarter and Indigo, where they can, you know, finance early stage projects by providing T-shirts and merchandise. It shows the hunger around the country to back early stage ideas. But until the Jobs Act passed and we legalized equity crowdfunding, there was no way to provide ownership in these new ideas to people who wanted to invest in those companies. And unfortunately, the regulations that were developed for equity crowdfunding has really made it not work. In this, you know, enormous economy, I think the number is $37 million and maybe $50 million nationally that has been raised around equity crowdfunding. And so, you know, to me, the answer to your question is, first of all, fix equity crowdfunding. And the second answer is, in each state, there ought to be a major concerted effort to simplify the regulations required to start new businesses. Because, I mean, it's just daunting for entrepreneurs with all the various steps and regulatory things that they need to go through. Those are the two major barriers for getting new businesses off the ground.
I agree on the fixed crowdfunding front. You know, the early, you know, players that have been raising money, there's been some, I mean, I think some very promising success. So we need to, you know, allow that, leverage that success, and really make that available to everybody, but we need regulatory fixes. The Congresswoman, I know she asked about sort of the you know, the concentration in capital and how we sort of fix that as well. I know there's legislation that's also been introduced in the House, you know, to develop opportunity zones, if you will, that really would, you know, leverage private sector money out there and, you know, allow for certain incentives or benefits, whether it's capital gains exclusion, if they are investing, you know, in those areas of the country. So I think there's a lot of different solutions, and I do agree a lot happens at the local level, too, in terms on the regulatory front, that we need to lower those barriers.
The gentleman's time has expired. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Just one question, Mr.
For one
Mr.
question,
Chairman.
which may or may not take
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Mr. Shokin, I just would like to ask you, are you aware of any work, interagency work, in terms of the innovation economy? I know that the White House put together a working group that is basically comprised of CEOs to address the issue of the innovation economy and what could provide answers to the lack of business formation in our country. If there is anything that is done by the SEC, for example, or even SBA that you are aware of?
Thank you. So first of all, the innovation name in that commission in the White House, I think, is an inaccurate name.
Mm-hmm.
That Innovation Commission was put together by the White House to bring in best business practices into government. It was not to address the needs of the innovation economy, and I agree with you, that's a very misleading name, and kind of implies they're paying attention to the innovation economy, and I think they're not. They did create a commission of business people in the White House, but that really deals with big business. And I think they were very smart to do that, but there's nobody on that commission that represents the small companies in the innovation economy, and they should have a similar commission for that. Now, to your question, no, I don't see interagency cooperation on this issue, and I think this issue is just hugely important. We've got this train coming through the tunnel right at us on globalization and automation. You've seen the studies. Something like 20 million jobs are going to get destroyed by automation over the next 20, 25 years. We have to replace those jobs. The only place you're going to be able to replace them is from the innovation economy. And so that's why we have proposed this commission on the innovation economy. Bring in the smart guys, the bankers, the lawyers, the academics who really understand the innovation economy, and be there to give you, as the Congress, to give the White House, here are the easy short-term things you can do. I've outlined 5 of those today that are pretty easy fixes that would have major impacts. But we also need to begin to address the major long-term systemic issues that I've also identified that nobody's paying any attention to. And that would be a way to bring all of these, agencies, White House, Congress together and prioritize the innovation economy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then I think I will recognize myself for one question, just to kind of follow up on that. Ms. Kerrigan, let me ask you this. I think the impression, or perhaps misimpression, has been given that the new administration, relatively new, they've been in office about 6 months now, that they're not doing anything about small business. Could you, now I know we have a new small business administrator, Ms. McMahon, who has testified before this committee a couple of times and appears to be very serious about kind of shaking up the SBA and making it much more business friendly. Could you comment on your view as to what you've seen with respect to her? And secondly, one of the other things the administration has announced fairly early on is that they would like to get rid of 2 regulations for every new one that comes out of Washington, because the small business community in particular has been burdened by being overregulated for many, many years now. So if you could comment on those 2 things.
Sure. Well, I think there's 2 things. One is there's, small businesses in the small business community, existing small businesses, and then sort of what's happening to encourage more startups. So, sort of take those 2 things. I do think Administrator McMahon is doing a great job. I mean, she's traveling the country, talking to people, visiting, her centers, talking to small business people to really see, what needs to happen at the SBA in terms of their programs and services.
Now, is she talking to Boeing and to the oil companies, or who's she talking to?
She has actually talked to roundtables of small business owners, in these local communities, in addition to the staff themselves, to really understand, sort of how the SBA works, sort of the impression that small business owners have of the SBA. And she's doing this everywhere. And I think that's a really good idea, to listen to the customers, if you will, to see what they need, if the SBA is relevant, what else it can do to help small businesses. So from a policy perspective, I think the executive orders that the president put forward are just really good ideas to look at, sort of the regulatory environment in all of the departments and all the agencies, and see, what needs to be done to update, to streamline, to repeal, to clean out the regulatory underbrush. I know we're taking part, providing comments, going to meetings of the U.S. Treasury, had a big roundtable, very diverse roundtable of stakeholders in terms of what needs to happen from a financial service regulatory perspective. So I think all those things are positive, and hopefully when the White House gets these ideas and recommendations, they'll actually move forward on this. I agree, though. I think the president, he has this larger business council. I think it's a great idea that he's listening, to bigger businesses. But I think it would be a fabulous idea if he put together a startup council and listen to entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs. I mean, they're the ones that are on the ground. They're going to have the innovative solutions to a lot of these countries' problems. And he'll really get a sense of where the economy is. And I think that, you know, if you focus on entrepreneurship and small business and their policies, you get the broader policies right.
Thank you very much. We'll make sure that that gets conveyed.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Yep,
just for a
sure.
moment, just
Absolutely.
you raised the question of the SBA, and I'd like to advance the idea that, you know, business and the innovation economy has changed so much that it's time to consider perhaps dividing the SBA. The SBA is designed to deal with small businesses, the franchisees and the local stores and, you know, that traditional part of the American economy. The needs of those businesses are dramatically different than the needs of the high-growth innovation economy that is so important to job creation. And so you've got kind of a mixed mission for the SBA. And so let me just suggest considering, you know, really splitting the SBA into its traditional constituency and the needs of the high-growth innovation economy.
Thank you very much. We want to thank all the witnesses. I think you all three did a great job here this morning. Obviously, encouraging entrepreneurship is absolutely critical because an awful lot of the new jobs created in America today are created by entrepreneurs and small businesses. And the information that you've conveyed to us, I can assure you on both sides of the aisle, we'll do everything we can to put it to good use. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.